Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com. Oscast.
Hello world, I'm Tim Whiffen and you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. COVID-19, novel coronavirus, is rampaging the economies and societies of nations worldwide, yet no continent seems to have such a varied response and impact as Asia. From more relaxed and tempered approaches to the pandemic in Japan, we also see more authoritarian reactions in Indonesia. Which of these approaches has been more effective, and is that all we can take into account? What will Asia look like after a few weeks or a few months of these responses, and how will this impact the Indo-Pacific and world trade? In this, the first episode of a two-part examination, we focus our attention on China and India and broader considerations in the region to answer some of these questions. Joining us today is Professor Purnendra Jain, a member of the SIA Advisory Board and SIA's Head of Research and Academic Development. With Purnendra's special interests in many Asian countries, David, John, Purnendra and Tim get into the nitty-gritty of social, economic and diplomatic issues this has caused and may cause into the future. Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategicon can be found on the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify and on the Sage International Australia website, www.sageinternational.org.au.
Good morning, Purnendra, and welcome back to Strategicon.
Thank you, John, and hello, Tim, and hello, David. Good to see you after some time. Hope you are doing well.
Doing well at this end, and great to have everyone on the line.
Okay, Purnendra, I'm just wondering, now that we're in the world of coronavirus, how are the Indo-Pacific states actually coping with the virus? I mean, let's start off with China. I don't think that we can even cast aspersions on China's wet markets. Okay, let's say China's exotic eateries. Maybe that's a bit easier.
No, it's just a wet market.
Okay, well, David,
that's
at the
what
moment,
it is.
Yeah, I suppose. So, Purnendra, how do you think that China has come out of its part of the pandemic up to now? Apparently, the Chinese government has relaxed travel restrictions internally. Flights into and out of Wuhan have recommenced. This kind of assumes that Chinese authorities have solved its coronavirus problems, or has it?
Well, to start with, is whether it is Wuhan or the wet market, I think that's not an issue, John. The issue is that this virus originated in China, and everyone knows that and acknowledges that. Although, of course, we know that one of the Chinese government top officials at one stage accused the US, or if not accused, alleged that this virus was brought into China by the US military. So we can see that whether the virus origin in China or whether it was brought by the US, we see a great deal of tension between US and China on this issue, which we can discuss a little bit later about international relations and how this coronavirus issue will affect international relations and Indo-Pacific relations between countries in the Indo-Pacific. But your specific question about whether China has solved this problem is hard to know whether China has solved this problem. But what we know that China has relaxed its people's movement and is saying that the situation is becoming more and more normal. So there will be traffic in and out of Wuhan, but it doesn't mean that there will be traffic in and out of China into other countries. So maybe within China, there will be some movement of people, and the Chinese government is trying to give this signal that, look, things are becoming now normal in China, and the Chinese government has offered to help other countries in terms of solving this issue. And we know that plane loads of face masks and hand sanitizers, and even critical medical equipment, what they call PPE and other equipment, is being sent by plane load from China to other countries. So China, in this sense, some might depict China as a bad guy, but China is trying to depict itself as a good guy in this particular situation and environment, trying to tell the world that we went through this horrific experience, and now we can help others because we have become better than what we were 3 months ago.
I certainly appreciate that they are at least trying to put on a brave face, and I suppose the CCP are indeed trying to look like the good guys in this. Purnendra, and this actually goes to the whole group as just a general question, is there any chance that what they're doing and relaxing these laws is, let's say, sacrificial of their population? Is there any chance that this is just a show to put on because they're not afraid of sacrificing, let's say, some of their population to the virus?
I think we have to remember here that they desperately need their economy back up and running. And if that can be providing medical equipment to the world, it's a great way to rehabilitate their image. Because the terrifying thing the last few days are the reports out of China that the CCP is, whether it's doing it or whether it's just accepting it, but it's allowing the population to discuss the virus as if it was created in the United States and deliberately spread in Wuhan. So it's already turning into an information operation at home. The information operation is on overseas already, where we see the footage of Chinese medical teams helping in Italy. This has already gone from being a global pandemic to an information battle that it appears at the moment the Chinese are winning. And I would suggest that means that, their population are just pawns in the CCP game.
With regard to China being an autocracy, or at least the CCP being a totalitarian state, effectively, they need to be seen to be in control. They need to be seen to be strong. From my perspective, how much of that is actually, the real reason why China is doing what it's doing? That need for control, that need to project strength in spite of the adversity that is affecting not only China but the rest of the world.
Can I just comment on this? All the world, the entire world, has this image that the Chinese government, in the image or maybe truth, that the Chinese government in the beginning tried to hide this particular issue at the local level, at the prefecture level. And I think the central government then informed everyone that they were not properly briefed, and this suppression was at the local level. So they tried to take control of the situation. And in my view, it's very unlikely that the Chinese government under Xi Jinping would do something which will further erode China's image in the world community. So in this sense, I think we have to trust at this stage what the Chinese government is saying, that they have controlled the situation and they are ready to offer help to others. At the same time, I would also think that they are in full command of the situation, and they are observing, they are monitoring. There is great deal of surveillance in China on people's movement. So they are not going to relax the population to move freely from one place to another. That was not the case in China in any case before too. Some population in China cannot move from one place to another without a permit. So I think there will be control, there will be surveillance, there will be monitoring of what people are doing and how they are going, and they will keep on doing that kind of work because China doesn't want to, have its image damaged in the view of the world community.
But Purnendra, hasn't China already sustained that damage? I mean, it can't walk back from the fact that it mishandled the coronavirus initially, that it lied to the international community. These things will come back to haunt China in the post-COVID situation. That is, if we can assume that the CCP and Xi Jinping are going to survive this politically. Look, a fellow of SIA, Jonathan Ludwig, has just recently written a very interesting article about China's culpability with regard to coronavirus and its management. One of the things that he put forward in his article is Taiwan's role as an early warning of what would happen were this virus to break out. Now, of course, at that time, and for obvious political reasons, no one wants to speak to Taiwan directly because it gives a sense of legitimacy that Taiwan is an independent state with its own own view of the world, effectively, and under the One China policy under which it's currently sort of integrated, it would be very bad for the Taiwanese to sort of speak out of turn, especially against the mainland, for managing a strategic level crisis. What do you think this would have as an effect on Beijing in the coming months? Would you think that Taiwan is now starting to find its voice in the international community? Do you think that coronavirus will be something that finally breaks the One China model with regard to Taiwan?
Look, the case of Taiwan can be put together with the case of Hong Kong and to a certain extent with Singapore, because these are the countries, Taiwan, of course, also Hong Kong and also Singapore, they realized this situation very early, and they started to put restrictions because these are the countries or territories or special territories, Hong Kong. They suffered quite seriously the impact of the SARS in 2000 of SARS in 2003-4. I can't remember exactly, 2004. So they knew how a new virus can affect their societies, their people. So they took a very a kind of preventive step early on, and that prevented this virus from spreading in these countries. But the question about Taiwan's legitimacy in the context of this virus is something which is quite interesting, John. To what extent Taiwan will then be considered as somewhat different from its status thus far. It's too difficult to say at this stage, in my view, but I guess Taiwan, if it keeps controlling and there are no major outbreaks in Taiwan, it will come out as a good example of controlling this virus. I also forgot to mention South Korea in this context because the South Koreans are also they handle this situation quite well, not to begin with, as did Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore. But later on, I think South Korea managed this situation quite well.
David?
I think it's going to be interesting to see when researchers look at this, and they are going to talk about Taiwan's response, not as is Taiwan an independent country or isn't it, but simply there's a Taiwanese response, a Singaporeese response, a response in Hong Kong, and a South Korean response. And all of them are instructive in how to get different parts of this right while functioning within a democracy. So the interesting example where it's not the authoritarian ability to use the social credit scheme and all the technology attached to monitor and manage people and the ability to weld apartment doors shut on the authoritarian side. And it's not the chaos of the United States not taking it seriously because it would impinge on their freedom. It's that interesting balance of, wanting to be democratic, but also wanting to maintain a strong control over public health. And I think that is something that will frustrate China, that Taiwan is seen as an independent entity in how it dealt with it, balancing its desire to genuinely be democratic and yet still be very competent when it comes to something like a public health or security crisis.
Absolutely. I think the point about public health is an important one, because in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and South Korea, even in Japan, I think general public, they are very conscious of public health, their hygiene in particular. I know that face masks are a huge matter of debate, whether we should put face masks or not when you are healthy and you don't know whether you have got asymptomatic characteristic. I was in Japan throughout February. I returned from Japan in early March. But I saw people, extensive use of masks in Japan. And even I used to wear it, because if you don't wear, you look weird in Japan. Yeah. So I was wearing face masks, and everywhere there were hand sanitizer. Every building you enter, there hand sanitizer. And in Japan, in most of these Confucius societies, they don't shake hands, they don't kiss in public, they don't hug people in public. So all these things already created this social distancing in some sense in these societies. And these might have been some of the reasons, if not, not to spread the virus. But I think these might be some of the reasons that these societies are very careful about their hygiene, personal hygiene and public hygiene. So they had this kind of structures or arrangements in place, even in Singapore. So there might be some of the reasons that they had their virus spread has not been as extensive as we see in some other parts of the world.
David?
I think the other thing that's really important and perhaps interesting about Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea is all three places have an incredible culture of street food. And that culture of street food has become one of the really appealing things for tourists. And they've all long since made the decision to clean up food hygiene, to make sure that you can eat from a stall in the street, knowing that the hygiene is pretty much on a par with going into a commercial kitchen. And that's an incredible thing to have done broadly that has been beneficial for their population, but also situates them, better, that something like, the wet markets of China would just be unacceptable in all four places.
This episode's musical interlude comes courtesy of Soda with their track Slow March. Support them or listen to them more on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify with links in the episode description.
You will
Slow March by Soda, an apt description of the recovery that many Asian countries will have to take once this pandemic subsides. So let's return to the discussion.
Purnendra, what do we know about how India is coping with COVID-19? We talk a lot about China and its culpability with regard to the virus, but India is a vast and complex country where there are significant discrepancies in caste, religion, education, and economic development. There are also major local political divisions based on ideology and, to some extent, competency, let alone its patchwork of federal and the patchwork of federal and state infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, how has Prime Minister Modi been dealing with this crisis?
India is an interesting example. You have got the second most populous country in the world, officially 1.3 billion, but maybe more than that. Prime Minister Modi, he went a hard way on this particular issue. One Sunday, he said that this will be people's curfew. In other words, everyone will self-restrain and not come out of their house for one day. And that was for 12 hours. And they celebrated it after that 12 hours ended. But I think 1 or 2 days after that, within a span of 4 hours, he declared a 21-day total curfew. In other words, people could not come out of their homes or their apartments or their dwellings. So we haven't seen this kind of strict measures announced in any other country in such a short period of time. So that way, India is quite interesting. But of course, that has got lots of socio-economic impact. One day after this was announced, a lot of daily wage earners, for example, in big cities, they began to leave cities in their thousands. And the government has had no control on these people. I have been talking to my folks and my contacts in India on some of the bus terminals, and they also have stopped most of the train services. So most of these people, they assembled at bus terminals, and they began to actually walk hundreds of kilometers towards their villages or towards their hometowns. Because they didn't have a job, they didn't have any income, they didn't have any savings. The government did not announce how they are going to provide food to these people or shelter to these people. So it became quite chaotic in the first 3-4 days. But it looks like things have settled to a certain extent. But certainly it has settled for middle class, upper middle class, and rich people. They are happy, they are supporting. But if you look at hundreds and millions of very poor people, this has had a devastating impact on them. And as some of the journalists have been writing, that lots of people in India will die of hunger and other kinds of diseases, not by coronavirus. So that is a huge issue in India. And how the government is going to, the government has announced several packages, economic packages, and there are lots of religious organizations, social NGOs. They are providing food. They have stepped up and they are doing what they can do. But the state apparatus or the state level organizations are not strong enough. And also the health system in India is really, really very poor, very bad. So the Indian government is very worried if it spreads what's going to happen, because they don't have any strong public health system.
Prime Minister Modi's language was incredible, where one of the speeches, he said, we can either have 21 days of isolation or lose 21 years of development. And I thought that was incredibly striking. And then with the chaos that you were just describing, Purnendra, it seemed to me that the calculation had been done. the people with the education, the people with the technical skills, the people who can hold the modern Indian economy together, the calculations have been done, they can probably get enough resources together to just about survive 21 days of isolation on short notice.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there was a terrible calculation that there is nothing they could do fast enough that would save the millions who work from day to day and live from day to day. And if that falls to bits, have to walk home. In a sense, you almost have to accept they are going to spread the virus with them. And the only safety is going to be for those people who can stay inside for the 21 days while potentially the virus roils around them.
Mm. Yeah, but it's a terrible state of affairs, David, because
absolutely.
we are not talking about 1 million people. We are talking about hundreds of millions of people. And if they become sick, that will have impact on the economy, on society, and they will spread a virus as well. So it is in government's interest to look after them. And to look after them economically and socially. But the government, it seems to me, has no clear plan for these people, and they did not think carefully. And sometimes I wonder in hindsight why the government had to do it in 4 hours. Like they could have taken 1, 2, 3 days and did it in some kind of phases and educated and explained to people what is going to happen and how that plan is going to be executed. That could have been a better way of handling. But look, I'm not government and I don't know, but this is my take on this issue, looking at the situation of hundreds and millions of people, and they add to the economy of India, right? So if you just care about middle class people or higher middle class people, your economy will suffer very, very badly. And already, lots of credit agencies and the World Bank, they are saying that India's economy will go backwards quite significantly, and the growth may not be more than 1 or 1.5%. So India might have already gone 21 years behind in my calculation. But let's see how it plays out. It looks like there will be a longer period of this curfew or isolation in India than 21 days.
I suppose the other thing, and I've not really seen any information about this, and you might be able to sort of fill in some gaps, but the huge agricultural sector of people in villages growing the food that feeds everybody. What's happening there is, are people able to get on and maintain agriculture? Is the food supply literally coming to a screeching halt as farmers can't take stuff to market? Or how's that being dealt with?
Well, there are some reports that farmers are not able to get their produce in the marketplace. So they are burning those things, or they are just, I have seen an image where thousands and thousands of liters of milk, they were thrown in the water. They had no idea how to sell their milk, tomatoes and other green vegetables and fruits. They are just putting them outside for cattle or for dogs and other animals to eat them, or cows. So that's the situation. But I have been talking to people in big cities like Delhi and Mumbai. They are saying that still there are supplies of fresh produce in those places. But of course, they are in a lockdown situation, so they have to order online or they have to order by phone, and some people come and then they deliver those things to the security guard at the entrance of that communities, and they go and pick up those things. But how long this is going to continue, that's an issue.
Is this sort of blurring some of the lines of the caste system, in the sense that now that social distancing is a part of everything, it's almost as if, I don't want to say that everyone is untouchable, but it is that people, even in the middle of the caste system, are now almost viewed in some of those same kind of moral contexts.
That's a good point. Jokingly, I told one of my friends in India that, look, in India there's caste system and there are untouchables. As a matter of fact, now everyone has become untouchable. Because no one is shaking hand, no one is trying to go close to each other. And people in big cities, they are cleaning their own toilets. They don't have home helpers. They are so used to home helpers 24/7, but they don't want home helpers to come to their homes because they live in slums. And they don't know what kind of viruses, apart from coronavirus, they will bring with them. So they are all on their own doing their dishes. So they're learning new skills, all these middle class people. So you have seen videos coming from top movie stars and celebrities, how they are coping with this issue. They are saying they have more time with their family. They are learning new things, cooking, cleaning, all those kinds of things. So I think there will be significant transformation in Indian society as we know it today. So there will be, but the cost is going to be very huge. And I think the other country in Asia which we can compare is Indonesia. We haven't talked about that. Maybe we should talk about Indonesia as well.
Well, Purnendra, since you've now mentioned Indonesia, my next question is, of all the Southeast Asian countries, it seems that Indonesia, our next door neighbor, has the highest fatality rate in Southeast Asia for coronavirus. What can you tell us about how Indonesia is coping or not coping with COVID-19?
Well, unlike India, where Prime Minister Modi went a hard way without thinking about the socio-economic impact of this total lockdown, the Indonesian president, Jokowi, he can't decide which way to go. So they have been very slow in their response to tackle this particular issue. Reports which I have read, and I have been watching some of the media outlets or reading media outlets from Indonesia, what they were saying that Jokowi was more interested in Indonesia's economy and business, and he was very hesitant to introduce any kind of rules and regulations that will have an impact on businesses in Indonesia. So having said that, in the last 1 week or so, I think now he has realized that this is not a fantasy, this is not something which is out there and it's not going to affect Indonesia. He has realized, so he is doing a few things, but I still think that's not enough. So we don't know how this is going to play out in Indonesia, and how many people are sick, how many people are tested. I mean, these questions also relate to India and some other South and Bangladesh and Pakistan. Lots of so-called emerging or developing countries, no matter how you tag them, we don't know how many people are sick, what's the testing regime, how many are affected by coronavirus. But the point about Indonesia is that the president has been very slow in responding to this particular crisis. And only now he has made some announcements, but nowhere near what we have seen in the case of India.
With regard to Indonesia, obviously the Indonesian tourist industry is going to take a huge hit, especially with regard from Australians visiting Bali. Has there been any sense of just how the Indonesians are going to be coping with the loss of one of their critical industries for at least a temporary period of time?
Well, the cost is huge and people are suffering. Just like in India, I told you that it's quite similar situation in Indonesia. Indonesia, like India, doesn't have a good public health system. The the income gap is so large. In Indonesia, there are, again, millions of very poor people. They live on daily wages. They are in the unorganized sector, whether they are tuk-tuk drivers or whether taxi drivers or they're street food vendors. All these people have lost their income. They have lost their source of income. So it has impacted, and it will impact very badly. No one is going to go back to Bali in a great hurry from Australia, put it this simply, right? The impact is quite significant, and the government has announced some packages, but I don't think that's at this stage enough. So they will need support from multilateral organizations like the World Bank, for example, or even countries which have been giving foreign aid to Indonesia, like Australia. They have to step up and give some more support to these countries financially, medical supplies, maybe other kinds of technical help to these countries to deal with this issue.
In Southeast Asia, Purnendra, the Philippines has enacted some of the most extreme set of laws to keep its population from defying social distancing rules. President Duterte's shoot-on-sight orders, for instance. Has the Philippine government lost the plot, or are there good reasons for Duterte's over-the-top measures?
Well, I mean, one thing, as we know that in the Philippines, there are majority of people, they are Christians. So they have stopped, visiting churches and places of worship as many other countries. But I think the president of the Philippines, he has taken extreme measures, and to say that shoot people if they come out of their homes is an extreme form of trying to deal with this particular issue. We haven't even seen these kinds of things in China, and how the Philippines, an elected president, is going to make these kinds of statements is just unthinkable and unimaginable and actually unacceptable.
One thing I was just thinking about then as the two of you were talking is that whether it be Indonesia or the Philippines, where religion plays such an important part in people's life and family plays such an important part, it seems here that the idea of stopping people from going to worship or stopping people going to funerals, getting it down to only a few people at a funeral and maintaining social distancing, that this is going to be incredibly difficult. So that once the death rate really starts rising in both places, these incredibly powerful social norms of faith and togetherness are just going to make managing the situation so difficult in both countries.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just in the Philippines or Indonesia. As you know, in India, most people, at least they are religious in the sense that they would go to a temple, do their rituals, and all those things are now banned in India, so no one can go to temples. And very recently, there was a case where there was a mosque or some kind of a conference hall where lots of Muslims assembled. There was an international conference, and from this faith, people from Indonesia, Malaysia, and other places, they were there, and they did not heed the orders of government, and they became a source of this virus, and government is having a great deal of problem. And this particular issue has been problematized in India as the other, and that has created another issue because this came out from a Muslim congregation. It has become as Muslims are culprits, and you should not trust them. So these things are also raising all kinds of religious, social, economic issues, and we don't know the extent of these things, and they will unfold as time passes.
Purnendra, Singapore is also in full lockdown, but this kind of policy coming from a tiny island state with a largely politically compliant population favouring social cohesion and stability, perhaps this wasn't such a big stretch for the Singaporean government. We can safely say that of all the countries of Southeast Asia, Singapore's response to COVID-19 has been, dare I say, quintessentially rational and orderly, right?
Mm-hmm. You are absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, Singapore did not close its schools until this yesterday. So kids were still going to schools. People's life were like half normal. You could go to a park, take your children to a park, or you can go to a swimming pool. All kinds of leisure activities they were on. But of course, they were encouraging people not to go unnecessarily on the street and work from home as much as you can do. And as you know, Singapore is a country where lots of multinational companies are located. So they took this decision themselves that they would let their employees work from home. They provided all the facilities which were needed. So in a sense, people were doing the right thing. So the government did not need to interfere too much in their life. But there was a cluster in Singapore last week, 2 apartment blocks where all these Bangladeshi or migrant construction workers were located. So there was an outbreak in one of those apartment blocks. So 2 apartment blocks were totally isolated, consisting of 20,000 workers. And that triggered Singapore government's response that they need to go a little bit harder on this issue than what they have been doing before. So now they have put some more restrictions like swimming pools and places of leisures. They are closed. All the street vendors, food courts, they are not closed, but you cannot go and sit there and have your food. You can have takeaways. So Singapore is not in complete lockdown. Still, people can go out for, as in Australia, you can go for a walk. You can take your children to a park, and you can have a run on the street. All those kinds of things are still open in Singapore, but I think they watch very carefully. As you know, Singapore is a society with surveillance is very, very strong. So they have been following people coming from overseas through a smartphone or through some kind of other devices. And they made sure that people who were instructed to remain outside instructed to remain inside, they remained inside.
Purnendra, Malaysia is arguably the Achilles heel of Southeast Asia. Having recently been rocked by political scandal prior to COVID-19, the government looks weak and does not have the confidence of the country's major population groups, the Malays, the Chinese, and Indians. The population diversity of Malaysia, as well as its current political weakness, suggests the country is struggling to set policy on COVID-19. Or is there another story to be told?
You are right. In terms of political situation is very fragile in Malaysia. There's still a lot of infighting. Mahathir wanted to continue as prime minister, but Malaysia has introduced a very strict regime to tackle this coronavirus. But predominantly being a Islamic country or place where Muslims population is quite high, the concern in Malaysia and in Indonesia is after Ramadan, after the Ramadan period, they make home visits, they go and visit their friends and relatives. How the government is going to control those kinds of things is $1 million question at this stage. We really don't know. But in Malaysia, they allow only one person from a household to go and get their grocery or medicine. Rest of the time, they need to stay home. So they have introduced quite strong, very strict measures. But how those measures are going to play out in the next 2-3 weeks, we have to watch and see what's happening there.
It was very interesting, some of the social media coming out of Malaysia, that it was meant to be the head of the family that would go out and do the shopping. So it's the first time ever that a lot of Malaysian males, and I won't say Malay or Chinese or Indian, I'll just say Malaysian males, actually had to go and do the shopping for their household. And there've been some incredibly unsuccessful shopping trips.
There are statistics. They're saying that in India and Pakistan, if you look at the percentage of male and female contracting this virus, it's majority of male population in India and Pakistan. And that might be the reason, because males are going out to get their grocery or pick up milk or whatever, and they might be contracting this virus, whereas women are staying inside the homes mostly, and they are not doing shopping. So that might be one of the reasons to how you explain this. I'm not sure about it. But Malaysia, as far as I know, it's one person. I'm not sure whether it is head of state or any other person can go and do shopping. But I understand from some of my colleagues in Malaysia that this is one person.
Thank you very much for your time, Purnendra, and thanks for joining us on Strategicon.
Thank you, John and Tim and David.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you could subscribe to Strategicon through the Ozcast network, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and please like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Until next time, goodbye.
Ozcast. Doctora Ramos, a la sala de espera.
Hay un problema que afecta a muchos niños que no puedo resolver sola. Se llama estrés tóxico. Es la manera en que el cuerpo de los niños responde a experiencias difíciles, desde palabras bruscas hasta una pérdida dolorosa. Esto hace que sea más difícil combatir infecciones y enfermedades. También aumenta el riesgo de problemas de salud a largo plazo. Pero hay pasos que los padres pueden tomar para ayudar. Aprende 4 cosas que puedes hacer para superar el estrés tóxico en first5california.com.